Listen carefully as I begin the story, not with fire and blood, but with light. This is the story of how a fragile girl managed to survive in the lair of an ancient magician, how the desire to live turns the victim into a hunter. The story of a girl named Maria, and she was softness and quiet warmth. The kind of girl for whom the wind stopped. The kind of girl whose laughter was a balm. She was one of those souls that people describe as gentle. But this word is too small for who she really was. You were her once. Or maybe you only dreamed of being her. Maria had the ability to see beauty where others passed by blind. A fallen feather on the sidewalk. A crack in the pavement filled with moss, little things that whispered magic. She never called it that out loud. But she felt it, humming under her skin like a sleeping star. That's when she met Ernest. When Ernest, he wasn't loud or flashy. No, his beauty was the kind that made silence feel full. His smile was easy, his voice calm, and when he looked at Maria, it was as if he truly saw her, and not just the surface. They met under mundane circumstances, which is how the deepest enchantments usually begin. A bookshop, a shared glance, a comment about the weather, then coffee, then long walks, then arms that felt safe. Ernest made her laugh. He remembered the names of her favorite constellations. And when he invited her to move in with him, into that grand old house nestled between woods and whispering hills, it felt like something out of a fairy tale. You remember, don't you? Maria didn't hesitate. She packed her things and brought her bright smile and soft humming into his home. She didn't see the shadows yet. Not yet. The house greeted her like a sleeping animal. Still. Waiting. And beneath it, something else was waking up. She arrives with a suitcase, small but full, her favorite books, hand-knitted scarves, and a mug with a tiny chip on the rim from which she always drinks tea. Ernest carries the heavier things. He insists. His hands are strong but gentle, and you think, this is what safety means. The house stands tall, older than it looks. Stone, not wood. Still not dead. It seems to inhale when she crosses the threshold. She doesn't notice. Not yet. Inside, the air is cool and the walls are too quiet. Not a warm quiet, not the kind you curl into. No, this quiet has edges. It stretches too far between footsteps, and it lingers too long after words. She tells herself it's just the size of the place. It's a grand old house after all. It needs filling. It'll feel like home soon, Ernest says, brushing her hair behind her ear. She nods. She explores in small pieces. A little more each day. The library, the greenhouse, the sprawling garden out back. There's a hallway she avoids without realizing, and a door at the end of it that won't open. When she asks, Ernest smiles. Storage. The key's somewhere. I'll find it eventually. He doesn't. Sometimes at night she wakes breathless. Dreams cling to her skin like cobwebs. She doesn't remember them, not fully. Only pieces. A hum beneath the floor. A voice she almost recognizes, saying her name over and over, not like a call but like a warning. Ernest sleeps soundly beside her. Always. She doesn't wake him. She tells herself it's nothing. Still, the silences deepen. They stretch between her thoughts. They curl under doors and sink into the floorboards. She hums to herself when she walks the halls now. Softly. A warding instinct. Something is listening. And the house is waiting. She waited until he left for the day. He had kissed her softly, told her he'd be back before dark, and closed the door behind him with that usual calm certainty of his. Always so composed. Always so sure of his place in the world. She wasn't sure of hers anymore. The house felt different now. It always had a silence to it, but today, she wandered slowly, letting her fingers brush the cool walls. She wasn't looking for the door. Not consciously. But her feet knew the way before she did. There, at the end of the narrow hallway, the one she avoided without knowing why, it waited. The door. Ordinary in shape but not in presence. It was slightly ajar now. She stepped closer. Inside there was no light. Not even from the windowless slits near the ceiling. Yet something glowed faintly in the center of the room. An altar of dark stone, slick as if it had been weeping. Not recently. Repeatedly. She stood there just inside the threshold, not breathing. The altar was surrounded by dried flowers, by curling paper-like petals, and small bones arranged in precise spirals. Not animal bones. Not quite. She didn't know what she was looking at, not completely. But she knew enough. It was sacred. It was old. And it was used. Still warm, in a way that defied the cold air around it. She stepped back slowly. The shadows didn't follow her, but they didn't need to. She closed the door behind her and leaned her forehead against it, heart steady, but only because something inside her had gone still. She would not tell him. Not yet. The house had revealed something to her. And now it waited very patiently to see what she would do. She didn't mention the room. When he returned that evening, his coat dusted with late spring wind and the scent of pine still clinging to his sleeves, he asked her how her day had been. She smiled. Lit. Told him she'd read in the garden, organized her books, made soup. He smiled in return. His eyes lingered on her longer than usual, as if trying to look through her instead of at her. But he said nothing more. He made them tea, and they sat by the window while the sky turned the color of wet ash. He told her about a meeting that went well, a new opportunity, a stroke of unexpected luck. His voice was warm, easy, but she heard something beneath it, like metal beneath velvet. And all the while, the door to that room remained closed. Not locked, just untouched. She could feel it in the bones of the house, a pulse in the floorboards, a tension under the paint of the walls. She tried not to think about the altar, about the way it had hummed against her skin, like it recognized her. But it slipped into her dreams. In the dream she stood before the altar. The room around her was filled with a dim red light, as if the walls themselves bled memory. And she wasn't afraid. She wasn't confused. She was still, waiting, listening to a voice just beyond her shoulder, low, rhythmic, and intimate. It whispered her name again and again, like the memory of a vow she hadn't yet made. When she woke, her hands were trembling. But still she said nothing. She told herself she needed more time. To think. To understand. But beneath that lie was something older, colder, more honest. She already knew. Some part of her had always known. The dreams did not stop. Each night they took her by the hand and led her back to the same place. The hidden room, the altar, the carved stone. But in the dreams there was no dust, no silence. The air was full, thick with incense and breath, as if the room was alive. She stood before the altar, hands empty, eyes clear. Around her, symbols pulsed faintly on the walls and floor, burned into the stone itself. She did not try to leave. She did not speak. She only waited. And in every dream there was the same voice behind her. Calm. Familiar. Not Ernest's. Older. It whispered her name in a rhythm that matched her own heartbeat, until she couldn't tell whether it was calling her, or coming from her. When she woke, the shape of the dream clung to her skin. She would blink, and for a moment the ceiling above her bed looked carved, not flat. The floor beneath her toes felt like stone, not wood. Then it was gone, but not forgotten. During the days she found herself touching the walls as she passed. Not idly, not thoughtlessly. Searching. She started to notice small details in the house that hadn't meant anything before. A dark stain under the rug in the dining room. Scratches around the doorframe leading to the cellar. A section of molding in the hallway that felt just slightly warmer than the wall around it. The house wasn't just old. It had layers. Secrets folded into its very frame. Some it offered willingly. Others she had to earn. And Ernest? He was glowing lately. Not visibly, not exactly. But something in him shimmered, like a man whose fortunes had recently turned in his favor. He laughed more. He touched her more. But it was different now. His affection had a weight to it, like he was staking a claim. She smiled. She answered his questions. She let him wrap his arm around her waist. But a sliver of her heart had stepped outside the cage of her ribs. Stood apart now, watching everything. She no longer felt like a guest in the house. She felt like the offering. She was brushing her hair when she saw it, just above her collarbone, peeking out beneath the lace of her nightgown. A mark. Circular. Delicate. Not a bruise. Not a scar. It looked drawn. But it wasn't ink. It pulsed faintly beneath the skin, a soft shimmer like moonlight through water. When she touched it, it felt warm. She tried to wipe it away. She tried not to panic. But beneath the surface of her thoughts, something inside her whispered, "It's not the first time." That day, Ernest acted normal. He kissed her temple. He made her coffee. He told her he'd be out late and that dinner was in the fridge if she got hungry. She nodded, watched him leave, and for a moment, just a breath, she saw something shift in his face. It wasn't malice. It wasn't cruelty. It was certainty, like he already knew how the story would end. She stood in front of the mirror a long time after he left, stared at the mark. It hadn't faded. It looked clearer now, more etched. A sigil. A seal. An invitation? No, a claim. And when she closed her eyes, she could see the altar again. Not in the dream. In her memory. That was the moment it first struck her. This wasn't just déjà vu. It wasn't just a strange sense of familiarity. She had been here before. Not in this lifetime. Maybe not in any. But her soul knew this house. Her bones remembered the chill of stone beneath them. Her breath remembered chanting she didn't understand. The house hadn't chosen her. It had called her back. She didn't cry. She didn't run. Instead, she sat in silence and listened to the hum beneath the walls, soft and low and alive. And somewhere deep inside her, something old began to stir. She had avoided the room for days. Not out of fear, she didn't feel fear anymore, not in the way she used to, but out of respect. Like one avoids stepping on a grave too recently disturbed. But that morning she woke before the sun. The house was utterly still. Even the birds hadn't started. And something was calling to her. Not in words. Not in sound. In weight. In pressure behind the eyes. A gentle hand at the base of her spine, guiding her through the quiet corridors. She didn't even bring a light. Her feet knew the way. The hallway greeted her with that familiar heaviness. And there it was again, the door. Closed but never truly locked. She reached for the handle, breath calm, heart steady. It opened without resistance. The room hadn't changed. And yet it had. The altar was still there, stone and shadow and silence. But now candles flickered on either side of it. Wax pulled into runes she didn't recognize, but somehow understood. She stepped inside. The air was warmer this time, thicker. It pressed against her skin like a wet cloth, and something in her chest shifted, like a door swinging open inside her, mirroring the one she just passed through. She stood in front of the altar, and for the first time she didn't look away. She remembered. Not everything, but pieces. She remembered kneeling. She remembered another face, one not Ernest's, smiling down at her in a different life. She remembered saying yes. And then nothing. Just the taste of iron. The smell of smoke. The silence of being offered. She turned and left the room slowly, hands tingling. Her eyes burned with something unshed. Something ancient. She didn't close the door behind her this time. It didn't feel like it belonged to her anymore. Or perhaps it never had. That evening when he returned, Ernest looked at her differently. Not surprised. Not suspicious. Satisfied. As if a wheel had turned. A step had been completed. And she smiled back soft and slow. Because she knew something he didn't. She was starting to remember the ending. After that morning, the house began to change. Not drastically. Not in a way someone like Ernest would notice. He walked its halls with ease, untouched by its weight, its breath, its mood. But she noticed everything. The walls creaked differently now. Not from age, but from intention. The cold spots no longer roamed at random. They lingered near her when she stood too still, as though waiting for instruction. Even the mirrors had begun to warp. Not visually, not obviously, but when she caught her reflection, she could swear it was delayed by just half a heartbeat. Watching, reacting, choosing when to mimic. She found herself moving more carefully through the house, not out of fear, but out of awareness. There was no illusion anymore. This place was alive. It wasn't haunted. It was hungry. She spent long hours tracing her fingers over the etched marks on the walls, the ones she used to mistake for cracks. They hummed when she touched them now. Faintly. Warm. And the dreams, they were no longer dreams. They were memories bleeding back through time. She saw herself dressed in white, hands bound in red thread. She saw a circle of hooded figures, none of them Ernest. Ernest didn't belong to the before. He was something new. Or perhaps something that learned how to wear a better face. She began to wonder if he'd ever really needed her love at all. Or if it was all just preparation, softening her, drawing her in like marinating the soul. But she played her part well. She smiled. She kissed him goodnight. She asked him how his work was going. "It's all coming together," he said once, his eyes glinting like wet obsidian. "Better than I ever imagined." She didn't ask what it was. She didn't need to, because the house had told her. In whispers, in breath, in the silence between heartbeats. It was almost time. But she wasn't afraid. She was ready. She waited until he left again. Coat on, smile easy, no suspicion in his voice. "I might be late," he said. "Don't wait up." She nodded, kissed his cheek, and the moment the door clicked shut behind him, she moved. She didn't pack a bag. That would have made it real too soon. She just slipped on her coat and stepped out onto the porch. The air outside tasted wrong. It wasn't cold. It wasn't warm. It wasn't anything. The wind didn't move. The trees didn't sway. The sky above her was bright, cloudless, but the sun had no heat. Still she walked. Down the stone steps. Along the narrow path lined with lavender and bones. Though the bones, she now realized, had always been there, just better disguised. The gate was visible. She'd seen it every day. A simple wooden fence marking the edge of the property. She stepped toward it. Closer. Closer. And then nothing. Her feet stopped moving. Not by choice. Her breath caught in her chest like a net had been cast around her ribs. The house was behind her, but it was inside her too. Its wool coiled around her bones like ivy. She tried to speak, to scream. Her throat stayed closed. She reached for the gate. Her fingers passed through it like smoke. Not a gate. Not real. A veil. She turned back slowly, eyes wide, pulse roaring in her ears. And in the window above the porch, there he was. Ernest. Watching. He didn't wave. He didn't frown. He only looked at her, with that same satisfied calm. Like a host who knows his guest finally understands there is no exit. She returned to the house, walking slowly. Not in surrender. In calculation. She had confirmed the truth. She was not in a home. She was in a cage made of memory and ritual and stone. But even cages can be broken, if you strike the right place. After the gate, something changed. Not in the house. In her. She no longer wandered aimlessly. She moved with intention. With precision. She stopped pretending this was a home, and began treating it as what it truly was, a system. A maze. A machine made for a single purpose. And she had been placed inside it like a drop of blood on an altar stone. The house responded. It watched her more openly now. She went back to the altar room again. This time she brought nothing. Said nothing. Just sat on the cold stone floor, cross-legged like a girl waiting for a story. And the room remembered her. She felt it, the recognition. The old warmth rising in the stones. A slow pulse through the sigils etched along the floor. The mark on her collarbone began to glow again, faint but steady, as if responding to an old command. She placed her hand on the altar. A vision struck her, sudden and full. Blood fresh and running. Her own face reflected in the surface of the stone, eyes wide. Not with fear but resolve. A voice not hers whispering, "You broke the cycle once." She gasped and pulled back. The image vanished. But the meaning stayed. She hadn't just been here before. She had fought before. And maybe, just maybe, she had won. Somehow Ernest had drawn her back. Restarted the loop. Polished it, disguised it. Hid the hooks inside silk and tenderness. But the house wasn't loyal to him. The house was loyal to ritual. And she was beginning to unwrite it. It was in the library. She'd been in there many times. Early on, back when she still thought she was in love, and the house was just charmingly old. The books were thick, dusty, unindexed. Ernest had told her, smiling, that many of them had belonged to the previous owners. Generations of them. Now she understood what he meant. She found the book tucked behind false spines on the lowest shelf, hidden in the shadows where the light never quite reached. A blank cover, no title, bound in deep green leather worn smooth by handling. She didn't remember pulling it free. It was already in her hands. The pages weren't paper. They were something else, thick, fibrous, almost alive under her fingertips. The ink was deep red. The text was written in no language she recognized. Yet she read it. Not with her eyes. With something behind them. It was a ledger. Names. Dates. Rituals. Descriptions of offerings. Symbols she had seen in her dreams. And then her own name, written clearly, several times. The first entry was dated long before her birth. The last was dated for tomorrow. She didn't drop the book. She didn't scream. She turned the page. There was a sketch, rough but unmistakably him. Ernest, drawn with sharp lines and hollow eyes. His name wasn't written, but it didn't need to be. Beneath his likeness were 6 vertical slashes, crossed through by a horizontal line. 7 offerings, 7 renewals. Each one earned him more, wealth, charm, time, power. And her, she was the 8th. The book snapped shut on its own, dust blooming around her like breath. She sat very still, the book in her lap, her fingertips tingling. She understood now. Ernest hadn't found her by chance. He'd summoned her, just as he had summoned the ones before her, just as he would summon the ones after her, unless someone stopped the ritual. She traced her name on the cover of the book, then stood spine straight, heart calm. If tomorrow was meant to be the end, then she would make it his. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat by the window and watched the woods, the sky, the stillness that pressed itself against the glass. The moon hung heavy, full and close, like it had drawn itself near just to witness what would come. Ernest came home just after midnight. His coat was damp. He looked tired, but content, like a man who had completed something important. He greeted her with his usual warmth, kissed her forehead, poured 2 glasses of wine. He was so good at pretending. But tonight, she didn't have to pretend. They sat across from each other on the velvet couch in the parlor, the wine untouched between them. He talked about the stars, about how the house always felt different under a full moon. She watched him closely, searching for seams in his skin, for fractures in the illusion. And then as he looked away, just briefly, something slipped. A flicker. Not in his face, but behind it. Like the mask wavered for a heartbeat. And what she saw underneath wasn't human. It smiled. Not cruelly. Not wildly. Just emptily. A grin like a blade lying flat. A shape that had worn skin too many times and forgotten how to shape sorrow. He turned back to her, eyes soft again. His face restored. But she'd seen it. He reached for her hand. She let him take it. And in that moment, she made a vow. Not with words, not aloud, but deep inside the place where names are written before birth. You will not take me. You will not feed on anyone else again. I will burn your ritual down to its roots. He smiled, her hand in his. I'm so glad you're here, Maria, he said, almost tender. She smiled back, and thought of the book, the altar, the unfinished circle. She would finish it, but not in the way he expected. The house didn't sleep. It shifted around her in subtle ways. Doorways slightly wider, floors that no longer creaked, air that moved with breath she didn't release. It was preparing itself, dressing for the ritual. She walked through it barefoot, silent, one hand trailing the walls. The sigils had grown clearer, brighter. Some of them pulsed when she touched them, warm and quick like a heartbeat. Others recoiled cold and inert. She went back to the library. The book was still there, waiting where she had left it. This time, when she opened it, the ink glowed faintly in the dark. Her name had moved to the final page. There was no time listed, no hour, no details. Only her name, written in a darker red than before. Not ink. She tore the page out. The page curled in her hand, edges darkening. She held it over the candle on the writing desk. The flame didn't catch immediately. It trembled, flared, and then swallowed the page whole. The fire burned tall and silent, white, blue, and angry. When it vanished, the air around her felt lighter. For just a moment. Then came the sound. From the floor below. A crack. A groan. And a laugh. Not loud. Not joyful. She didn't run. She took one long breath and whispered, I know what you are. Tomorrow, he would try to finish the ritual. Tomorrow, he would call her to the altar. But tonight, she would prepare her own magic. Not ancient. Not sacred. Human. And if he thought she was just another offering, he had forgotten that some sacrifices don't go quietly. Dawn came slow. The light through the trees was a pale gray, not gold. Not warm. The kind of light that forgets how to touch you. The kind that only shows you what's already broken. She rose before he did. She moved through the house with practiced grace, touching only what she needed. A mirror in the hall. A candle in the cellar. A hidden drawer beneath the stairwell where she'd found something days ago. A thin knife with an ivory handle. It hadn't been left there by accident. The house had given it to her. She felt that now clearly. The house wanted change. It had grown tired of repetition, of blood spilt in the same pattern over and over. Ritual is a powerful thing, yes, but ritual without will is just habit. The house was ready for something else. So was she. When he woke, Ernest found her in the kitchen, humming softly as she poured tea. The sun had barely crested the trees, but she greeted him as if it were any other day. He smiled as he always did, kissed her forehead, told her he had something special planned. A walk. A moment. Just us, he said. Her hands did not shake. She thanked him. She asked no questions, because she knew where he would take her. And she would go. She looked at him then, really looked, at the man who had chosen her not because of love, but because her soul burned bright enough to draw old gods. Because she was worth more than others. He mistook her silence for softness. But what lived inside her now was not soft. It was a blade wrapped in a girl's skin. And she would let him walk her into the ritual, so she could walk out of it alone. They didn't go outside. He told her, just after breakfast, that today was important. He said it gently, like one might speak to someone fragile. He touched her cheek and asked if she trusted him. She said yes. Her voice didn't tremble. He led her down the hallway she had come to know too well. The one that seemed longer each time, the air heavier, the silence thicker. At the end, the door waited slightly ajar, as it had been the first time she found it. But today it was different. The shadows inside moved. He guided her in like it was a ceremony. No force. No threats. Just his hand at the small of her back, steady and sure. The door closed behind them without a sound. The altar was waiting. Candles burned in the corners now, flickering blue. The bones had been rearranged, cleaner, more symmetrical. Fresh flowers, white and red, had been placed along the floor in deliberate circles. He stepped ahead of her, his presence shifting. Something underneath the man she knew rose to the surface. Not monstrous. Not wild. Just ancient. She took her place in front of the altar. Her heart was calm. This wasn't fear. This was return. He stood behind her. She didn't have to turn to know he had the ritual knife in hand. She could feel its hunger. But she had come prepared. The knife tucked inside her sleeve was simple. Steel, not silver. Hers, not his. And as he began to speak, softly, reverently, in a language that hadn't touched the air in 100 years, she remembered the ending. Not the one written in the book. The one she would choose. The words he spoke were careful, measured. They hung in the air like smoke, drifting into the cracks of the stone floor, coiling around the bones and the candles in her breath. She didn't move. Not when he circled her. Not when he placed his palm against the back of her neck. Not even when he whispered her name. Not like a lover but like a key. This was the moment. She knew it. So did he. The ritual fed on consent. On stillness. That's why he was always gentle. That's why the house never locked its doors. He needed her willing. He needed her unaware of what she was agreeing to. But this time she was awake. And the moment the knife left his robe, glinting, curved, ancient, she moved. Her hand flashed from beneath her sleeve. He didn't see the blade until it was already in his side. It wasn't clean. It wasn't graceful. She wasn't a killer, she was a witness. A survivor caught in the middle of something old and cruel. And this was the only ending left. He staggered. The knife clattered to the stone beside him, blood seeping through his fingers as he tried to speak. The ritual words faltered, broken. No, he gasped. You don't. But she did. She stepped forward and kicked the ancient blade away. Then she pressed her hand to the altar. The sigils beneath her palm flared. Pure. Burning. Erasing. The ground shuddered. The candles blew out all at once. He cried out, not in pain but in loss. She turned to look at him one last time. Not the man. Not the monster. Just a figure who had clung to stolen power for too long, and now it was unraveling. The house was choosing, and it was choosing her. The altar pulsed beneath her hand. Alive, aware, and no longer bound by his command. Didn't resist her. It welcomed her. Symbols once carved to take now shifted, reformed, their sharp angles softening. The stone grew warm, the hum rising from beneath like a song reversing itself, undoing centuries in seconds. She turned her eyes toward him. He was still conscious, slumped against the far wall, blood trailing from his side. But his face wasn't twisted in pain. It was something far worse. Realization. "You can't," he said, voice thin. "You don't know what you're doing." But she did. She stepped back and raised the blade again, her blade steel and mortal and free, and drove it down into the center of the altar. The stone cracked. Not a hairline fracture, no. A deep rupturing break like thunder made flesh. The sigils flared once more, then blinked out. And with them, the hold he had over the house. Over her. Over all the ones who had come before. He screamed, not from pain but from emptiness. Because what he fed on, what he bound himself to, the cycle, the sacrifice, the wheel was gone. She backed away, breath ragged, heart still calm. The room shook. Dust rained from the ceiling. The bones along the walls crumbled into ash. The candles cracked and shattered as if they'd held too much truth inside. And then she saw it. The wall to her right split down the middle. Behind it, light. Not just sunlight. Soul light. Dozens, no hundreds, of glowing shapes began to stir. Human and inhuman. Pulsing with grief and gratitude. The lost. The taken. The freed. They looked at her as they passed. Not with words. Not with faces. But with peace. And then they vanished through the cracks, through the stone, into the world again. Into the dawn. The spirits passed like a breeze through bone, quiet and reverent. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their silence was a kind of blessing. A farewell whispered not in words but in release. And with each soul that slipped through the cracks, the house began to fracture. The walls moaned. The floor beneath her trembled. Not in collapse but in surrender. She turned back toward him. Ernest lay on his side, pale now. His blood soaking into the altar room stone. Whatever power had once wrapped around him like a second skin was gone. He looked smaller. Human. His lips moved. She stepped closer just enough to hear. "You've doomed us all," he whispered. She shook her head. "No," she said, voice steady. "You did. A long time ago." He tried to lift his hand. Maybe to curse her. Maybe to plead. But nothing came. His body gave out before his bitterness could. She left him there. The door opened before her. She didn't touch it. The house opened it for her. Each hallway she walked was falling apart behind her. Not violently, not destructively, but as if something ancient was exhaling its final breath. The sigils on the walls faded. The air cleared. The silence uncoiled. She passed the library. The book that held her name had turned to dust. She passed the staircase. The steps were warped now, wood curling inwards like old paper. She passed the mirror. And for the first time the reflection smiled with her. Not after her. Not delayed. In time. She reached the front door. The one that had never truly opened. And this time it was already ajar. The wind met her there. Real wind. Clean. She stepped out into it. And behind her, the house groaned once more and began to die. She didn't look back. Not as the house cracked and crumbled behind her. Not in ruin but in release. As if the walls were folding inward, tired of holding what they were never meant to contain. The path before her was clear now.
No fog. No enchantment.
And when her bare feet touched the edge of the garden, the place where the bones had once been disguised as beauty, she felt the earth sigh beneath her. The sun was rising. Not timid. Not gray. Gold. It spilled over the hills, poured through the trees, touched her skin like it was grateful. The light reached through her, and for a heartbeat, she felt everything. All the lives that had been taken. All the names erased from memory. All the souls that had been kept in silence, now free. They moved with the wind now. She could feel them, not haunting, not clinging, but brushing past her in thanks. And her? She stood at the threshold of something new. Not the life she had before. She couldn't return to that. The girl who moved in with Ernest was gone. But what had risen in her place? She was something else entirely. The mark on her collarbone faded in the sunlight. The final thread of the ritual cut, not by death, but by choice. She had broken the cycle. And in doing so, she had become something no one had ever expected her to be. A survivor. A destroyer. A keeper of the undone. She took one breath, then another, and walked toward the light. She didn't disappear. That's what many people think happens to survivors of stories like these. That they vanish. That they walk into the mist and are swallowed by legend. But Maria lived. She didn't tell anyone about the house. There was no one to tell who would understand. The land where it once stood became overgrown quickly, as though the forest had been waiting to take it back.
No ruins. No trace.
Just silence, soft and green. She moved. Found a small place of her own, one room, warm windows, a kettle that always whistled at the perfect moment. She planted herbs in the window box. Sometimes she talked to them. They always grew toward her voice. She had dreams now and then. Not of the altar. Not of Ernest. Of the ones who had come before her. They stood at the edges of sleep watching her. Whole. Free. Not mourning. Just remembering. And she remembered them too. Not with guilt. Not with grief. But with knowing. She carried the weight of what had happened. Not like a chain but like a blade she kept sheathed at her side. She never forgot what she had done. What she had stopped. And what she had become. They never found him. Of course they didn't. He hadn't belonged to the world that wrote police reports. He belonged to something older. Something that fed off the innocent and the unaware. But that world, his world, was broken now. Cracked where she had struck it. She didn't speak his name again. Not because she feared it, but because she knew. It had lost its power. And in the quiet mornings, with her tea and her books and her quiet little life, she would sometimes close her eyes and feel the sun on her face. And she would whisper, to no one in particular, "I chose to live." And the wind, gentle, reverent, would answer her back,